Hi, this is Tom for Poker VIP, and welcome to part 3 of my series on Pot Limit Omaha here at TonyBet. So, previously, we have two tables running. The left-hand table is a $25 table. The right-hand table is a $50 table. And the previous two videos, we covered what I'd be looking for pre-flop and potentially getting aggressive in post-flop spots where the situations open themselves up to that. And we're going to be doing the same in this session. We're still going to be playing quite a value-heavy strategy, even up to PLO 50. The fact that 50 games I've been running the last couple of days is reasonably good news. I think it's going to show off a different stake, and it will also help perhaps illustrate the differences between stakes and what adjustments we possibly should be making in those eventualities. So on the left-hand table, we make a reasonable open on the button. We get two calls, which is a little unexpected. We are going to be betting our two pair. And on the right-hand table, we're going to be opening a very playable hand on the button. Flop pretty good on the right-hand table, top two and second nut flush draw. We are just going to be betting and calling off most shoves. Really can't see a reason why we wouldn't be. On the left-hand table, the 5 completes a good chunk of straight draws and also potentially leads to issues with better two pairs. So we're just going to check back, try and take showdown. Potentially we can board pair. We're going to be calling off here. And unfortunately our opponent got it in fairly badly, but connected. That is going to happen on occasions. And we lose on the left-hand table as well, which is a little frustrating. So this does cover why you need a reasonable bankroll when you're playing PLO or Omaha. There's certainly the instances where you get it in good, and unfortunately your opponents get there with worse hands, such as the nature of variance, and there is a good chunk more variance in Omaha than there is in Hold'em. But it's important to think about how good you got it in, and also how well we're doing versus our opponent's range. We're going to be betting our nut flush draw here. We have enough equity to justify calling if it comes to that. We're going to be folding on the right-hand table. So there's a couple of things that I think should be mentioned when talking about playing Omaha and Omaha Cash. The first one of these is to really research where you're going to play. You're checking back here. And the reason for that is because rake in Omaha games can be quite extortionate. So it's a very good idea to look up the rake cap. We're just going to be checking back here. There's only two pairs and sets and straights that are never folding. 6-5, I guess, falls into that category. As I was saying, the rake cap can greatly affect your win rate. With pots in Omaha normally being on average twice as large as in Hold'em, you're going to reach the rake cap far more frequently than you would in Hold'em, and as such you're going to end up paying more rake. And if the rake cap is particularly high, that is going to greatly affect your win rate to the tune of 4 to 5 buy-ins 100, which is incredibly significant. PokerStars is particularly bad in having quite a large rake cap. But it's also important to factor in sort of other factors as well, how soft the games are, etc. Here at TonyBet, the rake cap is quite high, but then you have to consider that you get 80% rake back, which kind of evens it out and makes it quite competitive. And the games are also quite soft. But there are other sites that I play on fairly regularly. So if ever I'm talking to one of my coaching students and they're asking me about what site they should play, the first thing I say is to play reg tables rather than fast forward. The competition is just overall far, far softer. And the second thing I say is do not play on PokerStars, because it's just a giant rake trap, and that will greatly affect your win rate, and you'll find soft competition on other sites, but also you'll find just cheaper rake as well. We get queens on the right-hand table. For a min raise, I am going to be defending against someone who got in pretty light versus me and also hasn't really topped up. Was playing a 30 big blind stack, is now playing 60 big blind stack. It's min raising, which, as we touched on in the first video, is a leak. So we're going to assume he's not the world's most proficient player. This is an interesting spot given we have a straight. Our queens block Queen Jack. We do still have to be worried about Jack 7. And even though we block it, it's not impossible that our opponents have the nuts. We also have to consider potential redraws. And betting into 4 players here is somewhat terrifying. But he certainly can be betting some draws. He can be betting some 2 pairs, some sets. So we're going to call once and evaluate what he does on the turn. The turn is a brick. It doesn't bring hearts in and it doesn't improve any potential 2 pair or straights. He bets again. I will be calling again, and we're going to evaluate what to do on this river. Board pairing is somewhat terrible. That said, it's unusual for him to fire 2 streets with a 2 pair set type hand, unless it has the nut flush draw with it. That being said, if he fires river, it really does kind of polarize his range to completely nutted or complete air. And I really can't imagine a scenario in which he fires into 4 people on the flop, even though I don't give him much credit for being a particularly good player. So I am going to be unfortunately folding. I think the board pair makes it a bit easier for us to do so as well. A bit of an unfortunate start to the session, but I think overall our decisions have been reasonably solid, reasonably justifiable. We're going to be folding the small pair when the ISO raise comes in. Gibbon is one of the regs at this site and seems to be playing 25 and 50 to a reasonable standard. He's pretty much always sitting those tables. So it's really not surprised to see him isolating what is a weak limp, especially when under the gun. Just going to be checking my 9 back here. Conceivably, I can have the best hand, but we're just trying to get showdown as cheaply as possible. And that doesn't change anything either, so we're going to continue on our plan to just take showdown. And here's queen. Fair enough. Reasonably good hand on the left-hand table on the button. Dependent on action, we're likely 3-betting. It must be said when I touched on 3-betting and how we're going to be using a position to take the initiative pre-flop and try and drive hands heads up. We can't 3-bet if it is limped in front of us, which is exactly what's happened here. So I have 2 options here. I can either call or I can re-squeeze. And I think I'm going to take the re-squeeze option. It looks incredibly strong. If we get 4-bet, we can almost always put our opponent on aces, and against aces, this hand is not doing stunningly well, given we have an ace in our hand. But it helps define my range, and we do have positional advantage as well. We get called in 1 spot. When we get led here, with an O pair and a nut straight into 2 people, we're just going to be calling here. And with my gut shot and nut flush draw, it's obviously a range that my opponent can hit, but we have enough equity to just bet call off here. Turn is fairly good for my hand on the right-hand table. The only slight problem is it's difficult for my opponent to have much in terms of straights, given we have 2 of the queens. I think, however, if we call, he's probably shutting down anyway. We're only going to get a check call on river. So I'm going to put a small raise in and attempt to play for stacks versus 8-7 or queen 8 potentially. Try and get some value out of 2 pairs and sets. The result is not that surprising, but I still think it's probably just about the best line. So when I started the video, I said I was going to touch on 2 things important. The first one was the rake. The second one is attempting to profile players that we're going to be playing against in the small stakes PLO arena. There really are, I would say, 4 types of players we're going to find if we're playing anything from PLO 2 to up to PLO 50, and potentially even PLO 100. The first type is what I would describe as a loose passive player, and there are a few examples of that on these tables. Sarukas and King of Energy have kind of displayed those tendencies, as has Don't Give Up with open limping and playing a wide range of hands. So we can use a HUD to try and profile players. TonyBet is a HUDless site, hence why I am not playing with one. And a HUD is going to help on sites that do not have HUDs, such as Unibet and TonyBet. Then note-taking becomes essential. I obviously have a very small sample of hands on people here, so I'm playing somewhat in a vacuum. But we can use these tools to attempt to profile players. So as I was saying, the first type is the loose passive player. He is going to be playing a VPIP of around 80 to 90, and he's going to be limping a lot. So you'll see a huge gap between his VPIP, or his voluntarily put in pot, and his PFR, or pre-flop raise. So he's going to be playing something like an 80-10, 80-20 style. He's going to be playing a lot of pots, he's going to be limping a lot, he's going to be calling a lot, and he's going to be chasing a lot. He's going to be chasing most flushes, chasing most straights, even gut shots. And he's also going to be chasing on paired boards. And the way that we try and exploit these players is simply by just playing a value-heavy range and value betting them mercilessly. It's pretty much as simple as that. Just play ABC and go for as much value as we can possibly get from our opponents. The second type is a nit. So these players are going to be playing something around 10-6 to 14-10 type stats if we were using a HUD. And these players, again, they're reasonably easy to play against purely because they fold a lot when we get action back, much as we would with a loose passive player. Because they're quite passive, these players being tight passive rather than loose passive, when we get action back, we can pretty much always put them on a hand and then rapidly reconsider how our hand is doing versus their range. So they're reasonably easy to play against. However, what must be said is that you will rarely win much money off a nit because they fold a lot. So building a pot against them is quite difficult. So a lot of people think that poker is winning hands, and that is the sole goal. And it is in a way, but the main goal in poker is to be as profitable as possible. And nits, by their very definition, can take away the seat from players that we can win more against, namely loose passive players and maniacs, which I'll come on to in a sec. So one nit on a table is probably not going to do that much damage to you. More than one is going to make the game a less attractive proposition to play. On the right-hand table, we're going to be opening this very nice connected Broadway hand with the double suits, and have a very, very disappointing flop, and checking into two seems like the best option. When we're led into, we're just going to be folding. So as I was saying, they tend to take seats away from more profitable players, so we really want to consider how many nits we want on a table. The third type of player is the type of style I am playing in this current set of videos, and that is the tight aggressive style, namely playing a reasonably solid range of hands, but playing the range of hands that we have fairly aggressively. These players are going to be amongst the more winning players. They're going to be more reggish. And the way we beat these players is by essentially beating them at their own game, by having a better knowledge of ranges, by 3-betting them when we're in position and have good hands, by playing in position in general, and just by essentially playing their game better than they do. And the fourth type of player is the maniac, which is a topic I've had many discussions with coaching students over, because they are quite difficult to play against. The equities in PLO are reasonably close pre-flop, so whereas a maniac in No Limit Hold'em can get punished badly by getting a weak hand in, it's less punishable in Pot Limit Omaha. So we really have to take a long-term approach to the situation. We can't think in terms of, oh, I had a losing session and I lost 2 buy-ins versus a maniac, and let it affect us. We can't even think about it in terms of days, possibly not even in a week. We have to think about it over a month, or a long series of hands. For me, that would be a month. It would be 100,000 hands or so, give or take, 10,000 each way. So we have to take the long-term approach with them, and we have to consider that we are going to be playing a range that is tougher than theirs and stronger than theirs, but against somebody who's playing stats of 80-60 with a 3-bet of 20, which I have seen all the way up to PLO 100. We have to adjust accordingly. Excuse me. And we adjust accordingly by loosening up and by 3-betting our a wider range. So we're 3-betting not just big aces, big kings, we're also starting to 3-bet the good queens. And we're looking to really widen our 4-bet ranges as well. So we're going to be 4-betting big kings, big broadways, and just trying to exploit them that way. And if we happen to play against a maniac and he happens to outflop us in the 4-bet spot when 60% of the money's gone in, we just take it on the chin, know that we've made the best play, know that we've made a winning play versus that type of player, and accept that there are going to be occasions where they unfortunately happen to draw out on us. But know that long term, we are going to beat that type of player, playing a slightly, nice flop, playing a slightly looser version of the tight aggressive style that we've been playing in these videos. Now, no one in these tables has been playing a maniac style. There's a lot of loose passive players. Gibbon is playing a tight aggressive style. And if you go back to the previous video, Demolition was also playing a tight aggressive style. We get min raised here, which is very strange. I actually think when my opponent raises, he's likely got a 3. So the question is, what do I do? And I think I try and exploit as much money from this person as possible and get him to overplay a 3. If he has 6s full, I'm going to lose money no matter what. So we're just going to click back and attempt to get stacks in. Be checking my jacks and just trying to take showdown. If 5 comes off, theoretically that could change something. He jams, we call. And yeah, he does have a 3, and that is unbelievably unfortunate. As I said, against someone who's playing a very bad losing style, we're quite happy allowing him to overplay hands. Happens, he hit his 30% shot. That will happen. We take it on the chin and know that the play we made is a winning play long term. And it's important if we find ourselves on the wrong spot, on the wrong end of that kind of hand, to really evaluate what range our hands opponents would be doing, because almost certainly that player is thinking that he's just run bad by running into a full house and justice by hitting it, whereas he really should be considering how he's doing range-wise and whether he's overplayed, which, for the record, he has. So that brings us on to an important topic of emotional control. Pot Limit Omaha has swings, as evidenced by this session. Pot Limit Omaha has more variance than other forms of poker. The long-term win rate you can have is very competitive with any other form of poker, and I would argue if you're a good Pot Limit Omaha player, you will have a better win rate than you would in Hold'em, just because the overall standard is significantly worse. But that being said, there will be swings, and you have to be capable of dealing with them and be aware that they're going to happen. We're going to be 3-betting here against Gibbon. Be aware that they're going to happen, react accordingly, and not get emotional. Whether that involves you going to take a break, whether that involves you... I will pause this thought while I get 4-bet. I'm going to call here. My hand actually flops reasonably well. That's not quite enough. The problem I have is my opponent theoretically can have full houses, but that's not the main issue. The main issue is by 4-betting he's repping aces, and that blocks a decent chunk of my King Jack 9 draws. So, based on that, I can likely hit a King, a Jack, a 9, or an 8. Which is around 13 outs, but that is assuming that I can hit all of them. I block top set here and I have bottom set, so I'm going to be raising. So I think I'm just going to fold here actually and find a better spot. We get called. 3-8 is possible, but I really think that got that in on the flop. So we're just going to try and play for stacks again. So as I was saying, emotional control is enormously important because these kind of swings are going to happen and we just have to make adjustments to them. This is a disappointing river. 5-6 gets there, but that really should bet. I do question whether I can get any more money, given that most 2-pairs should get it on off flop, so the only hands he has left really are draws, namely club draws and the Jack 9-7 draws. It's kind of nitty to check, but I still think it's reasonable. Yeah. If you bet river, we had so little left that we pretty much have to call off. We're not happy about it, but it is for sure the better play. He's put enough money in that if he happens to get there, it's just very fortunate, and he's giving us too good of a price. But yeah, as I was saying, emotional control is enormously important, and if you don't have good emotional control, it's something that you should work on because it affects all type of poker. But you should probably play fewer Omaha tables than you would Hold'em, and just make the adjustment that way and slowly work your way up to multi-tabling 6 or more Omaha tables, and just then being able to focus on what you're doing. Moderately connected jacks to get 3-bet. I do have position, so I will defend. That my opponent folds is kind of laughable. I have a double gut shot on a spot that actually this flop really shouldn't connect with his range too much. He decides to bet, and I think I'm probably raising here. And the reason is simple. One, I block the nuts. Not well, but reasonably. Secondly, my opponent has shown a willingness to fire off. Thirdly, I have the 9 as an out, that's for sure. The jack is almost certainly an out. And I think the 8-5 draw is more than likely live as well. There's a good chance he folds. The times he doesn't fold, we're never doing too badly. He gets it in. He gets it in with 10-7, which is very interesting. And I don't think correct. And unfortunately, we run it twice, and he wins both, which I don't think is... I think is one, very surprising that we lose both, but two, it's a spot where he either has 50% equity or he's crushed. And he's got it in a spot with 50% equity and thinks that's a good thing to do. This is awkward. I still think I jam just because I'm not check folding at any point, but I really don't like the turn. Gonna call once here. And I'm going to be giving up on the turn when it bricks off. So on the right-hand table, we've been somewhat unfortunate, to be honest. The first hand against Don't Give Up, we got it in very good, and unfortunately lost. And we ran a spot twice, which was a 50-50. Against my range, my opponent is lucky it was 50-50, and we lost both of those, which is aggravating. The ace is unfortunate. We do have a flush draw. Does have 3 aces a chunk of the time. I'm going to call and see if he wants to continue. As played, I just jam here, I think, to be honest. If he has the king high flush, it's just me running into top of range. I think he calls off with 3 aces enough of the time to justify it. And I don't want to give him the option of checking back 3 aces or ace 10. The fact he folds is very surprising. I'm going to try and put the squeeze onto Dantic here, who's just sat down, and he normally plays 25. We're going to 3-bet power with a decent hand. He has very little back. He should shove just about every time. And once the Dantic just overcalls, we're just going to squeeze him here. And we have the best hand versus him. If he wants to call off his entire stack chasing, then he can. And here's queens and jacks. That is a bit frustrating. Needless to say, we have run very, very badly in this session. But overall, we've got it in good a very high percentage of the times. And this does unfortunately illustrate that in Pot Limit Omaha, you can make the right decisions repeatedly and unfortunately not reap the benefits of it. However, it's hopefully one illustrating, as I 3-bet another premium hand, one illustrating that you can still make optimal decisions while you're losing, and two illustrating that even someone who beats these limits, who has a very bad flop and a very good flop for his range, and a player who plays these limits and beats them and also coaches, can still have bad days. Everyone has bad days. We can't judge performances or sessions on individual occurrences. Bad days happen, and we just have to move on with them, unfortunately. They are a reality of life. It is the nature of the beast. And as I said when talking about player types and dealing with maniacs, we have to take the long-term view and be aware that the spots that we've got it in were good, that the decisions we made were good, that our reads were good, that we put our opponent on correct ranges, and that we just had unfortunate results. It happens. The ace queen 7-4 is tempting to ISO, especially when Didante limps, which is a horrendously weak player. And as I said, when dealing with loose passive players, we're going to be value betting them mercilessly, hence why I got 60 big blinds in with Kingsbury. Going to be folding the raggy connected hand. Flop somewhat disappointingly. We do have top pair, but a good number of 4 flushes and 2 pairs are out when my opponent leads, albeit small. I really don't think this is a bluff. Occasionally he's value betting a 2-pair hand. Sometimes he's betting for information. Either way, we do not have the best hand in this spot, and we have a player to back behind. The 10-9-6-4 we're going to fold. And the 8-7-5-3 is a raise on button, but would have been folded if any action had preceded us. Getting 3-bet is not fantastic, especially from a short stack. The problem we have is that in terms of pure equity, we are rarely going to be below 40% here. And getting 2-1, that should make it a call. But our hand doesn't necessarily flop fantastically. When we get an overcall, we're getting far too good of a price to consider folding. Just flopping a pair is not going to be sufficient, though. And we can make a very easy fold versus the all-in. If we'd picked up a pair with a flush draw, some form of straight draw, etc., then we could have potentially made a call. But as is, we can find the fold. I do question why Eat Sleep PLO didn't 4-bet there and just squeeze me out the spot. We're going to open double suited aces, and I'm going to fold that out of position. Apparently it is one of those sessions as we get it folded around when we have double suited aces. We're going to smooth our kings. When off suited, they lose a decent chunk of value, but we have position and we can set mine with them. This is a flop that is not going to hit too many people's range. We do lose to a 3, we do lose to aces. When it goes bet call, it's somewhat weird. Don't give up has shown a penchant for overplay. And the only way I really know where I am is by turning a king. So I'm going to find a fold, especially when Gibbon has overcalled. When the flush comes in, even though it's paired board, I imagine that Don't Give Up likely has a 3 here, and Gibbon has probably turned the nut flush. In all probability, I likely think he has broadways that have a nut flush. He can have overpairs such as aces, kings, queens with the nut flush. Don't Give Up checks. And it's actually the 6-4 flush, which I'm very surprised by. And why 10's decided to lead out there is... I'm trying to find a nice way to put it, but it's awful. You beat nothing, you're turning your hand into a bluff. It further cements my opinion that he is very much a losing player in these games. So I'm going to wrap up these hands, or this session, pretty shortly. I'm going to sit out the next big blind. We'll see if we've got any more interesting spots in the meantime. So we had some interesting spots in this video. I think we talked well about profiling players. Unfortunately, the results have not been fantastic. That said, the spots we got ourselves in were pretty good. So we can look at that and realize that range-wise, we were doing pretty well in every spot we got ourselves in. And that it was an unfortunate example of the nature of variance within this game. But as we said earlier, this is an instance where we very much have to take the long-term view. It's going to test our emotional control, a test I think we passed by continuing to get our money in fairly good spots. So I think overall I'm reasonably happy with how we've played. It's made for some good material within this video. We're going to be folding this weak ace onto the gun. So as before, if you have any questions or comments, by all means leave them in the comments section below and I will respond to them when I see them. And with that being said, this has been Tom for Poker VIP and I will hopefully see you for part 4.